Hello and welcome to the Swan Song Project Podcast. My name is Ben Buddy Slack and I'm the founder of the Swan Song Project and the host of this podcast. The Swan Song Project is a charity. We're based in Leeds, England, and we help people who are facing the end of their lives or dealing with a bereavement to write and record an original song. We believe in celebrating lives, making memories and leaving legacies. If you'd like to find out more about the charity, you can visit our website, which is swansongproject.co.uk. The podcast features songwriters. Each episode I have a different songwriter on, and I ask them to share with us one of their songs. We have a chat about how they wrote it. I ask them to share a songwriting tip, and I also ask them to share a song that's meaningful to them in some way related to bereavement. This episode features Al Lewis, talking about his new album, 15 Years, which has been processing the loss of his father and him to come into terms with that and processing his grief. And yeah, it's a really interesting conversation. He was talking about two of the songs from the album. And yeah, there's lots of interest in songwriting process things comes up as well. I think you're really going to enjoy it. If you do, please like, share, subscribe to the podcast. We've got lots more great guests coming up that you're not going to want to miss. But without further ado, here is Al Lewis on the Swan Song Project Podcast. Enjoy. Okay, today I'm here with Al Lewis. Thanks for joining me, Al.
Oh, you're welcome. Nice to be here, Ben.
Now we're looking forward to our conversation. For anyone new to the show, this is the Swan Song Project Podcast. Each episode I have a different guest on, and we do it in three sections. First, we're going to talk about one of Al's songs. We're going to talk about how he wrote it. And in section 2, I'll ask Al for a songwriting tip. And in section 3, we're going to talk about a song that's meaningful to Al related to bereavement in some way. So over to you, Al. Which of your songs have you chosen to talk to us about today?
So I've chosen a song from my new album called In My Daughter's Eyes. It's a song about how I came to see my dad's. I just saw visions of him in my daughter for the first time, and how that inspired me to realize how our loved ones, even though they've passed, that they're still with us in the people that they've left behind, and how that can be a real comfort, I think.
Yeah, beautiful. So let's listen to it now, and then we'll chat a bit more about it. So this is In My Daughter's Eyes.
When I was 5, you went to live with your brother. I never asked why you couldn't stay here with me and my mother. The touching of temples was all we shared. Not that it mattered, for it showed me you cared. And I wish just once that we'd said I love you, but instead we'd hide behind our pride. You are the dimple on my smiling cheek. You are the accent when I start to speak. You are the house that you've held me to buy, and you are the glint in my daughter's eye. In my daughter's eye, in my daughter's eye. Who am I? I'm the man you helped me discover, and your love runs through me like a river that's broken the levee. But I still wish that we'd said I love you, and that we'd had just a little more time. You are the dimple on my smiling cheek. You are the accent when I start to speak. And you are the house that you held me to buy, and you are the glint in my daughter's eye. In my daughter's eye. that you're near and not far. As they ask to look at pictures on the wall, I simply say, you're the dimple on my smiling cheek. You are the accent when I start to speak. You are the house that you've held me to buy. And you are the glint in my daughter. You are the dimple on my smiling cheek. You are the accent when I start to speak. You are the house that you've helped me to buy. And you are the glint in my daughter's eyes. In my daughter's, 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 in my daughter's eyes.
Okay, brilliant. So that was In My Daughter's Eyes by Al Lewis. Yeah, it's a lovely song, Al. So yeah, what can you tell us about the writing process? So this is from your new upcoming album.
Yeah.
And the whole album's kind of inspired by the loss of your father, isn't it? And your reflections on that.
Yeah. Well, it's been a long time. The album's called 50 Years because my dad died when I was 21, having had multiple sclerosis for a decade. So for almost half of my life up until the point that he died, he'd been ill. And it had been something that I'd really struggled to articulate. Having decided to become a singer-songwriter, I think I'd always felt like I didn't want to impose my grief on the listeners. I felt I felt that it wouldn't be a subject that would appeal to a lot of people because having been through something like that so young, I realized that for a lot of people my age, they wouldn't be able to relate to it. And so I was afraid of sharing it and for people to sort of dismiss it or think, oh, why is he being maudlin talking about death and grief. And so, yeah, I put it on the back burner for a long time, not wanting to write about it. I would write about my dad sort of subconsciously or subliminally in sort of metaphors, but I would never explicitly write about him. And then after the pandemic and seeing everybody being really explicit and vocal with their grief and how it was a real communal thing for so many of us, it made me feel like perhaps opening up and talking about him would not only benefit myself, but perhaps if I wrote songs about it, it could benefit other people to hear my viewpoint on grief, and perhaps people could resonate with what I'd been through. So that's what I decided to do. And one song came out, and that became two, that became three. And I realized that I clearly had bottled up a lot of things that I wanted to say about this subject. And In My Daughter's Eyes is one of those, and it's probably one of the most personal, because it starts off with me explaining my childhood, basically, and how my parents split up when I was 5 years old. So that already created a bit of distance between me and my dad. And then we moved away, so there was geographical distance on top of that because we didn't see each other that often. And he was quite an emotionally distant man as well. So again, there was a lot of stuff to unpack there in terms of our relationship. But what I've realized in becoming a dad myself is all the stuff around that he would do for me, and all the stuff he would expose me to and teach me all those things that you sort of take for granted, or I did anyway as a kid growing up from my dad. But now the shoe being on the other foot, and I'm the one having to teach my daughters things, and you realize that it's an expression of love. It might not be the one that you think of first off when you think about expressions of love, but it is an expression of love, and that's why I wanted to write that song, to sort of say thank you to him really for the things that he did. And this album is a lot of conversations with him, in a way that they're things that I wished I could have perhaps said when he was still alive. But that's the beauty of a song, isn't it? Is you can have these dialogues within a song and put them out there, and people can interpret them as they wish to interpret them. And those characters within the song, it might resonate with somebody, perhaps not with their dad, but with an uncle or a cousin, or a different brother, and so these songs can take on deeper meanings for the listener.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Going back to when you said that after he died, and was that a conscious choice to not write about him explicitly then? And was it conscious when you were using metaphor? Like, did you have that feeling of like, I'd really like to write about my dad now, but so the way you explained it then, was that in your mind consciously then, or was that more of a subconscious thing?
I think I was definitely consciously not putting him in there, because I think also I was scared of being in a gig and breaking down, and the feeling that the emotion was too raw at that point. I think I've needed these years to sort of reach a point where I can talk to you now and talk to strangers and sing in front of strangers about him. I think for a long time I wouldn't have been able to have done any of this. I wouldn't have been able to talk to you, and so it was a combination of that, and also, like I said, this feeling I had that people wouldn't be interested in it. They wouldn't be interested to hear about my dad, because so much of the music we hear is about romantic love, and it's about heartbreak, yes, but it's the heartbreak of losing a love of a romantic type. And so I just thought, being a songwriter, that there would be no place for a song about grief. Obviously now I've changed my mind on that, and I've realized that there are so many great songs that have been written about grief and loss, and that it's and also as I get older, I've realized that it is something that a lot of us experience, but perhaps we, like me, we decide not to talk about it. We decide to bury those emotions, either, like I said, because we find it too painful, or we don't want to bring on the awkward conversations that sometimes can occur around grief and death. And I think these are all natural responses, but I suppose I'm reaching that point now in my life where I want to, hopefully, like you are doing here, just opening up these conversations so that it doesn't become such a scary thing to talk about.
And music's such a good bridge for that, isn't it? That's why I always find with this kind of stuff is that, a lot of people still find it very hard to have the conversations directly about grief, but sometimes music just acts as that little way in, where like you start talking about a song that reminds you of somebody, and then all of a sudden it's kind of like it opens that door, rather than I want to tell you about someone I've lost. It's like, oh yeah, that song reminds me of my dad, and this is something about them, and it feels like a really nice entryway, isn't it?
Definitely.
There's a few interesting things you said there, what was clicking in my head as you were talking. So I think the deciding what to write about is an interesting point for songwriters, isn't it? Of like, what themes are you going to work on? And I think so what I was thinking about when you were talking then was there's conscious choice about what you want to express and what you kind of feel, and then there's conscious choice about what you think your audience is going to want to hear. And that balance of, like you say, that I've definitely had that where I've kind of written a song, and you go like, oh, that's pretty heavy. Like, I don't know if an audience is gonna that's gonna have to be
exactly.
right night for that kind of thing. Um, but then also what you said then as well is when you're emotionally ready to think to do it, because a lot of the time I think the guidance is to process your stuff through it. And I think songwriting is such a good way of processing that. But as you allude to there, like you weren't ready to do that until you've done it now. And if you've done it before, it might have been too hard for you, and you might not have been able to do it in the same way. So I think that's a really something that I hadn't really clicked up before, of that, of like, sometimes the time isn't just right, and you've got to just sit with it.
Yeah, and I think it's as I said, I felt like you alluded to there, that the audience wouldn't understand, but I think now, I'm a bit older, so a lot more of my friends and colleagues and people who are in my circle in my life now can relate to it. Unfortunately, as we get older, we lose more people, and so it feels less strange, and it feels more helpful as well for me to open up about it now, as more of my friends are going through it. I feel like it can be of use to people now as well. And like I said, having been through the pandemic, like, as a society, I think we're more open, hopefully, now to talking about these things. And like you say, a song is a gentler way in, perhaps, to expressing these emotions, or as the listener, perhaps, to feel these emotions. So it just feels like the right time for me now.
Mm-hmm. Have you played many of these songs live then? So I know the album's coming out soon, but have you played any of them at your gigs
I have,
already?
yeah. I can still remember the first gig I did, and I was really, really nervous because I didn't know how my body would respond, really, because I'm an experienced singer songwriter now. I've been doing it for 15 years, and so I very rarely get nervous because I kind of know what's coming. But I really didn't know what was coming for that first time of singing these songs, and I remember my voice was quivering, and again, that feeling of looking into the audience and feeling like, are these people going to understand it? Do they care? Those feelings that I used to feel at the very beginning of my career, when you feel like you've got so much to say, but you don't know if anybody will resonate with what you've got to say. And but I had a lot of people come up to me after that first gig and say that those songs had touched them, and that they'd experienced grief and loss, and so after that, it really put me at ease and made me think that, okay, it is the right thing to talk about. And that's not to say it's still not hard to sing these songs. I've got a couple of gigs coming up this weekend, and I know that my mum will be in the audience, so again, that adds an extra weight to it. And so I'm just trying to rehearse these songs as much as I can so that I can be on autopilot in terms of the performance of them. It's that fine balance, isn't it, when you're performing a song? It's like you want to be at a level where you feel comfortable enough to sing the song, but also you want to put a bit of yourself into it as well. So these songs are there's definitely an added weight to them compared to a lot of the other songs I'm singing. And it requires a lot more of me, but I think there's definitely a deeper connection with the listener as well with these songs.
That was going to be my next question, but you answered it, and what you're saying there about whether you'd get people coming up to you afterwards. So I tend to find that a lot with, if you address something like that, particularly something like grief, where a lot of people might not want to talk about it. It's almost like that invitation then to people of like, oh, you shared something, I can come and tell you about my experience. And I always felt such a valuable thing, to be able to give people that kind of invitation to come and share their story with you.
Absolutely. I think a lot of us crave the ability or the space to talk about grief and loss, but we're scared to impart it onto somebody who's maybe not ready or can't understand. So I think if we find somebody who can resonate with what we've said, we feel more at ease in sharing that, and I think that's really powerful. And I think that's personally, what I found as well in talking to people in my podcast about grief and loss is that it is much easier because you know that they know where you're coming from.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the podcast is Feels Like Healing podcast.
Yes, yeah.
People can check out, which is, I'll let you introduce it if you want.
So it's nice being on the other side of this now, Ben, you see. So it's a podcast about people who have used creativity in whatever means to process their grief or trauma. And so I talk to songwriters, I talk to authors, I talk to visual artists, and it's about using creativity as a healing tool, which is where I'm coming from. And it's amazing. It is really amazing when you look out there to see how many people out there are using creativity as a healing tool for grief in particular, but also for childhood trauma. It's amazing how much art comes out of this.
Yeah, sounds like a great show. I'll put the link in the description as well for anybody listening to this who wants to check it out. I think, did you have Joe and Laura on from Projecting Grief?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I saw
that yourself, haven't you?
Yeah,
I saw your face on the website.
Yeah, I thought there'd probably be a few links between our networks. But yeah, they're really nice, Laura and Joe. Yeah, good stuff. Let's quickly get back to In My Daughter's Eyes. What was the writing process of that like then? How far into the album did that one come about, and what was the process right from when you got that idea?
So it was probably it was probably in the middle of the bunch of songs, and it was one of these ones where I was just strumming. A lot of my songs come from I'm just noodling on a guitar and I'm strumming away, trying to find something that tweaks my interest. And I think I was sort of reminiscing on the song This Year's Love by David Gray. And I was just sort of playing that on the guitar quite highly capoed up. So it was almost like a mandolin sound. And I can't, so it's funny, like when you're trying to think of what was that initial thing that came to you, it's hard to look back and think what it was. But I think it was the line, "Who am I? I'm the man you helped me discover." I think that was the first line that came to me, which would then become the second verse. And I think a lot of this album, it's about, because we realize that we get so much of our identity from our parents subliminally. We might not think we do, but we do. And that for me has been hard in not having that my dad's side around to sort of understand and learn where I'm from and who I am. And so I think those were a lot of the questions that was going around in my head when I was writing these songs, is sort of, who am I? Who is the man that made me? And what can I learn from this man who has died? And understanding that he is in me, his presence, and in the mannerisms that I have and the way that I speak. And so that the chorus is saying, you are the dimple on my smiling cheek. You are the accent when I start to speak. You are the house that you helped me to buy. You are the glint in my daughter's eyes. And it's all these imprints that he has on my life without me really recognizing it. And so, it was a song that came together quite quickly. And then it was just about sort of how do I shape the music around it, really, was the question. And the lyrics sort of came quite quickly. And then I think the notes that I've been trying to hit musically with these songs is poignancy, is finding that place where it's the music isn't too dark and somber, because the lyrical content is obviously quite sad and deep, that I didn't want the music to also be sad, and that would just feel to me like too hard to listen, because already for somebody who's lost someone, these songs might feel too hard to listen to. So I was trying to get a bit of a balance with the music so that there would be some hopefulness in the music. So that was sort of the thing I was trying to achieve musically rather than lyrically. I don't know if I succeeded, but that was the task I gave myself anyway.
And was that a conscious choice at the start of the whole project that you decided that's the musical direction you wanted to go in?
Yeah, I think so, because personally, in my taste, I always like that juxtaposition when you hear a song that sounds really sweet, but actually the lyrics are quite dark and sad, and there's something really appealing to me about that marriage of those two things in a song. So I think that's something I'm always striving for, and yeah.
I love this. Tom Waits said, "I love beautiful melodies telling me terrible things."
That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, I always like that. And so when you were talking about writing, then, so did the lyrics come first and then the music came separately, or would they kind of come together? This one particular,
I think, yeah, this one in particular, the lyrics came quite quickly first, and then, we're talking about the melodies and the music. I'm a big fan of country music as well, and one of the things that I've learned and I've sort of taken on board for this album in particular was that famous country line of 3 chords and the truth. And I've tried to stick to that for these songs as much as I could, because I think the success in country songs is they have great stories, and because the music doesn't vary that much, you're able to tune into the story a bit more, I think. And I think that's the reason perhaps that they say that 3 chords and the truth. So I was trying to link that in as well and give the music that sort of rootsy vibe. I'm from Northwest Wales as well, and where sort of traditional Celtic folk music is the bread and butter of where I come from. So that sort of folky country vibe is always, I think, quite strong in my music. And so, again, it was about choosing those right instruments. So there's a lot of violin on the album, a lot of acoustic guitar. And yeah, it's about that marriage of the stringed instruments and the voices, the stuff that, yeah, country music and folk music is built on. And that's the sort of palette that I wanted to draw from as well. I have got some sort of synthy things in there as well, as a sort of nod to the fact that we are in the 21st century. But yeah, it's an album that I'd like to think you could play on an acoustic guitar as well as hearing it with all the production, and that's kind of the balance I was trying to strike.
Yeah, brilliant. I think it's a really good way of doing it, where you kind of like what we used to call them. The word, I always forget it. It's a good word, but I always forget what it is. Where do you know where like you set something, but it doesn't matter if you break it? There's a word for it, isn't it? Arbitrary. Arbitrary.
Okay.
I think it's arbitrary. But where so for example, there, like you kind of setting yourself a bit of a brief of like, I'm going to stick to 3 chords and the truth, and have these kind of influences, and let the stories kind of lead, I guess. And like setting yourself a musical, an arbitrary boundary
framework.
So like I'm going to try and do this, and like it doesn't matter if you break it then, but it kind of gives you a bit of a focus. And it's that thing about sometimes restriction kind of improves creativity in a way, where like if you've got too many options, it can be too hard to choose. But if you're like, right, I've got 3 chords I'm going to use for this song, it can help you progress a bit more, and then like I say, it doesn't matter if you actually break the rules, but it gives you a way of getting going.
One of my favorite albums is Blood on the Tracks by Bob Dylan, and all those songs are in open D tuning. And that was another element that I was trying to incorporate. Didn't want to change the tuning too much as well. So I was singing a lot of these songs in G major chords. So again, like you said, that feeling that hopefully that restriction would enhance or push me to be melodically more interesting, more compelling, because I had that restriction, like you said. I'll let the public decide whether I succeeded or not. Or they might say, no, they all sound the same, Al.
There's a thing about decision fatigue. Have you heard this kind of concept as well?
No.
Some people where it's basically, I think the idea is kind of what you're alluding to there, where it's like you remove certain decisions, so you only have to then make decisions about the things that are most important. So
Yeah.
I'm sure this was like, Steve Jobs used to wear the same thing all the time. That's a turtleneck thing he used to always wear. And I'm sure I heard that was kind of his thing with that. And I've heard other people who are like that, where they wear the same thing every day. It's like, so I don't have to make a decision about what I'm going to wear, which just saves that little bit of brain space for then the things that. So if, for example, you were saying there, like, my main things here, then I'm telling the stories right, or making the melodies interesting, then the removing some of the decisions you have to make about chord structure and choice frees up that little bit of space, maybe.
Definitely. I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
There was another couple of questions I wanted to ask you before I move on. One, so when you started the concept of the album, what was so we're going to talk about the title track in a little bit anyway, so I don't want to ask you too much about that one now, but was it clear from the start that you were going to do the whole album about your dad? And if so, did you map out any of the concepts for the other songs before you started writing them, or was it very much like a natural process of I'm going to start writing? If my dad comes into it, there it is, and I'll work with it. Or was it like, I'm going to write one song which is this angle about it, or one song that's about this? And
it started off with just one song. I think I was trying to write a new album anyway, because I was in that period post album release, and so I was looking for song ideas, but it was writing one song, like you said, we'll talk about it later, the title track, and then sending that to my manager, and him just sort of being blown away by subject matter, because I'd never spoken even to him about it. And so he had all these questions like, I didn't realize all this stuff about your dad. And I said, no, it's because I don't really tell people about it. Even my manager, who's been my manager for over 10 years. So he was like, well, maybe there's something in this that you should explore. And so it quickly snowballed into 2 to 3 songs. And then it was like we were talking about earlier about restricting yourself in order to let your creativity bloom. I was then thinking, well, maybe this should be a concept album about grief and loss and fatherhood. I'd just made an album that was based on a literary and on a novel. So again, a sort of concept. And I think that framework really helped me. And so I thought, well, why don't I just apply that same idea to this and talk about my dad and talk about fatherhood, not only from the perspective of me being his son, but also from me now being a dad myself, and perhaps being able to empathize a bit more with his position, because I was now the age that I remembered him, because I'm now in my late 30s, and that was the age that I have my first memories of my dad. So I was suddenly looking in a mirror and I could see him for the first time. So all that stuff, I think, was sort of bubbling away, and it just it inspired me, I think.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. There was another question I was going to have about the album then, but I can't remember what it was. Yeah, it might come back to me in the next section. But another question I was going to touch you, which is kind of unrelated to what we've been talking about so far, but I understand you're singing Welsh as well, don't you?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Yeah.
As I just said, I'm from Northwest Wales, and Northwest Wales is the area where the Welsh language is most prevalent. The area in particular I'm from, it's 80% people speak Welsh as their first language. So growing up, it was quite funny because whenever we'd go on holiday anywhere else in the UK, I'd be amazed that people didn't speak Welsh. Because for me, that was life. That was normal life. And then you just drive a few hours, and then it's like, oh, why don't they speak Welsh, Mum? And you do, and then it's funny then as you move away and you realize how little people realize that there's this pocket of Wales where Welsh is the language of the street. And I think what I wanted to talk about was how precious that was and how it's under threat currently because and I think this is the problem not just for Northwest Wales but a lot of the beautiful regions in the UK where the wealthy are buying up second homes, and it's really eroding the communities that have been built there as people come in and then they're not living there. These houses are vacant for most of the year, and it has a real impact on these rural communities. And in the instance of where I'm from, which is Gwynedd in Northwest Wales, it also has an effect on the language because predominantly the people who are buying these second homes are coming from Cheshire, Manchester, Liverpool, obviously not speaking Welsh and not having an appreciation of the importance of the language. So there's that element that's coming into it as well, and it's diluting the prevalence of the language, and also the school numbers therefore going down in these rural communities. There are less kids, and so it's a problem that I wanted to bring to people's attention. And so I thought, well, what can I do to bring somebody's attention to it? And it's write a song. So yeah, it's a song about remembering the history of the area and remembering how important and fragile the Welsh language is and how we've got to protect it, really.
Is this a song from the new album as well?
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
It ties in because I write about my granddad's house, because my dad and my granddad, they both grew up in the same village. So, and my granddad's dad, there's a strong history in this tiny little village of our family growing up and living there. And me looking now as somebody from the outside who doesn't live in that village anymore and seeing the changes in that village and how many houses have become holiday lets and second homes, and it was just it felt like something I needed to talk about.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that was my follow-up question was going to be, how do you decide when you're writing something if you're going to do it in Welsh or do it in English? And I guess that one.
It's just where it comes from. I don't know how to describe it really. Sometimes it's a conscious decision. I think I want to write a song in Welsh today. But other times it's literally I'll just be mumbling, and then it's like, well, what does that mumble sound like? Does it sound like a Welsh mumble, or does it sound like an English mumble? But and it depends on who I'm writing with as well. Sometimes I've got friends and songwriting partners who I mainly write in Welsh with, like my good friend Arwel. I've been writing songs in Welsh with him for years, and so yeah, it depends who I'm in the room with. But yeah, I always find it hard to describe what it's like having a bilingual brain, because it just comes out in whatever way it comes out, really.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah, I love hearing songs from native languages that you don't hear as much of. We had Robert Robertson on the podcast well from Tidelines, the Scottish band. If you know them, and they do some songs in Scots Gaelic, which is it's really beautiful. And yeah, really interesting to hear that. I'm always interested in that when you've got the dual languages, how you choose which songs to which way to go. Brilliant. Let's move into section 2 now, shall we? This is where I ask my guest for a songwriting tip. So what would your tip be for us today, Al?
Let's think about this. I think my tip that I would also give my younger self starting out in songwriting is don't be afraid to write bad songs.
Very good.
I always used to think when I was younger, every song that I wrote, I was like, okay, right, when am I going to release this? This is going to be the top single that's going to make my career. And I think it's having that ability to step away from a song and that initial excitement, because I still, to this day, every time I write a song, I still think this is my best ever song. I suppose you need that. You need that excitement about a new song, because I think if that excitement goes away, then maybe that's telling you something else. But yeah, so to this day, I still write a song and think it's the best, the bee's knees. But it's then stepping away from that and having the ability to tell yourself, it's okay, that song, that's not one of your best songs, but that's okay. And it doesn't have to be out in the world. And my manager had a really good analogy of sort of think about it as like pouring a pint. And sometimes if you haven't poured a pint in a while, there's obviously some backlog in the pipes, and you're going to pour it and there's going to be a lot of froth and a lot of stuff that you're not going to want to drink. But you got to push through that until the beer starts to flow. And to think of it that way, and I think that's a really good analogy, that sometimes you need to declog the pipes and just write some songs that have no purpose other than just to be written in order to be discarded so that you can write a great song. So I think that would be my tip. Yeah, don't be afraid to write bad songs.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And yeah, just like, well, that thing, it's just like, it's all practice, isn't it? If you write a song and it's actually not very good at all, it's like, that's fine. You've learned that didn't work that way, or there might be something good about it that you can use in another song, and it's all just,
there's always a lesson to be learned, isn't there? And like you said, it's like any other exercise, any other job. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And I've certainly learned that as I've got older. Like it's definitely about repetition. You think, oh, creativity is this magical thing, and you don't need to work on it, but really you do. And even if you're lucky and you get this magical, brilliant song that comes to you in 5 minutes and it's fully formed, that's great. But you'll still need other songs throughout your career, and so to work on them and to chisel away at them, I think is really important. And like you say, even if you discard it, there might be a little bit of it that you can use for something else, or be inspired to take that as an inspiration for your next piece, and to be content with that, and not to feel like the time that you spent on that has been wasted, because it hasn't.
And sometimes, I'm not sure this is what I definitely had it where I've written something at the time, I thought, oh, it's not very good. Then I've come back to it a few months later and be like, oh, actually, it's all right.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually,
there's the flip of it. Yeah.
Maybe it's better than I thought it was. Maybe I will use this.
Yeah.
What's your like writing schedule like? And do you write like pretty consistently, or do you tend to write in bursts, or and do you finish everything you start? So this is another question that I find really interesting, of like, do you have, so even if something you think like, oh, this isn't really going anywhere, do you make yourself finish them, or do you discard ideas as you go?
Yeah. Well, to go to the first bit, how often what schedule do I have? I think I've definitely slowed down as I've got older. I think my initial few years of being a songwriter, there was a pile of books of ideas and songs that I'd started, and now I'm a lot slower in getting even to that starting position. But what I have found is that I've got some exercises that sort of get me ready. So I've got I read this book that suggested doing 10-minute exercises where you just riff on an object, and you just write about an object. So if I know that I want to be writing for an album or whatever, I will start that process up again of every morning taking 10 minutes and writing about a lamp, a tree, or a guitar, or anything. And the things that they tell you that are important to use in that exercise is your senses. So to incorporate smell, taste, touch, sound, and sight. And then the way you use those in these exercises, then you can pass through into your songwriting. And then talking about, like, do I do I have songs that I haven't finished? Less so now. I feel like before I would certainly have like half songs, but now I'm more inclined to want to finish something, because I feel like we just talked about, even if it's not going to be a number one record, it's that idea that you have followed it through and that you've got it to its final position. And like you say, you might come back to it and really like it. So I think there's definitely a merit in finishing it, like even if it's not great, because if you think about a carpenter having a half finished chair, it's not any use to anybody, but to sort of follow it through and to have that dedication to the craft, I think is really important.
Yeah, definitely. I really like that exercise. There's 10-minute riffing on something, and it feels almost like you said, at least the way you described it, of like a good warm up, especially if it's only 10 minutes. Like it can be daunting to be like, right, I've not written any songs now, I need to go and sit down and write a whole album. But like just go like today, I'm going to warm myself up for 10 minutes writing about something and get those juices going again. Yeah, it's a really good one.
And even if you don't write anything that day, you can then at least look back on that exercise book and say, well, I did start something on that. And it's nice to know as well, like we were just talking about, that feeling of writing a song and realizing it's rubbish, but it's a bit like that. Like you've written something and it's not for any use other than to get your brain in a creative space. And I think that's a really helpful way to think of it. And particularly, like you said, if you haven't written for a while and you're feeling daunted by the blank page in front of you, it's a good way of just getting you back on the bike.
Yeah, and then using the senses as well. That feels like another kind of good stepping stone of like, if you can choose any object to write about, and then if you're still struggling for things, you've got a few prompts there of what's it smell like, what's it look like, what's it touch like. Yeah, really good.
Yeah.
Hi, I am Jill Hurst, and as a family we have worked with the Swan Song Project to write a song about my husband Paul, who was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's 3 years ago at the age of 59. As music has always been a love of Paul's, and each day continues to bring him joy, writing a song seemed a great way to celebrate what he means to us. We wanted to get over the beautiful, kind man he is and our memories of our happy times together. This song is perfect, a powerful, poignant and upbeat tribute. Writing our song has been a fascinating and fun experience we will never forget, bringing us closer together as a family and giving us the opportunity to share our happy and sad emotions of this difficult journey. Please donate to the Swan Song Project to help more people write a swan song.
With you it's always a lovely day.
Brilliant. So let's move into section 3 now, shall we? This is where I ask my guests for a song that's meaningful to them in some way related to bereavement. And we've kind of had a double whammy with Al today, because the first song was obviously related to bereavement as well. So it's 2 for the price of 1. So which song have you chosen to share with us for this section, Al?
So I've decided to go for the title track, 15 Years, from the album, because this is the song that started the whole thing for me. To give you a bit of a backstory, when my dad died, as I said, I was 21. My mum and dad had split up, so he left me his little bungalow flat in North Wales, which at the time, when I was 21, I didn't really know what to do with. So I decided to pack it up and I rented it out to sort of give myself a bit of time to think about what I wanted to do with that house. And did I want to go and live in it? Did I want to sell it? What did I want to do? And then over the pandemic, it had been 15 years and I still hadn't sorted through my dad's stuff. And the lady who I'd had living there decided that she was going to move out. And it came to a head where I was like, right, well, what am I actually going to do with this place? And what am I going to do with all his stuff that I'd been deliberately avoiding, sorting through? And so I went up there to North Wales and sorted it all out and decided to sell the bungalow. And it was really emotional, sort of stepping back into this house. And we've just talked about that exercise about sight and smell. going into that house, it smelt like I remember it smelling when he lived there, and it felt like it felt. And it's amazing how our senses can bring back so many memories. And yeah, going up into the loft and sorting through all his paperwork and all the things that he'd kept from his childhood, and it was a really deep and heavy time to do that, but it was something I knew I needed to do. I couldn't put it off any longer, and it was really cathartic to go there and do it. And then a few days after coming home from doing that, this song 15 years came out. It's basically me talking about that experience of clearing out his house, and that was the first time that I'd ever explicitly talked about him in a song, and the fact that he died, and all the things that he'd put in these boxes that I'd never got to know about. Like, for instance, he'd wanted to start a steam railway. He wanted to build a steam railway. Like, he loved trains, and I knew he loved trains, but he had all these plans about this railway that he was going to design in North Wales and going to open it and boost tourism. He really wanted to help tourism in North Wales, and how this steam railway was going to really help do that. And it sort of, just gave me an insight into him as a person, his personality, and that felt really healing, to find those things out. And they're obviously painful things, finding those things out as well, and bittersweet in a way. But yeah, it became that song, and it started me on this journey of writing the whole album.
So it wasn't, and again, then was it? It just, you weren't planning to write about it. It just kind of came out as you.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of 2021, and I don't know if I'd even started writing any other type of song. I think I probably had. I'd been writing other songs, nothing to do with Dad, or grief. And then, just a few days after that clear out, this song just came. I was just strumming the guitar, and I literally just said the words, "I finally cleared your house out. It only took me 15 years." That was the opening line. And then the song is just a description of that day, really, a description of, like we talking about, the feeling, the smell, the touch, just me describing that house, and how that house was so loaded with memory and emotion for me. Even though it had been so long, it felt like only yesterday. It was almost as if when I got to the door that I was expecting him to open it, as silly as that sounds. But it's like, because I hadn't really been there since he'd passed away, I hadn't really spent much time in there. It was, it was as if it was the following day, really. Yeah,
it's such a kind of emotive thing. The amount of memories a household, isn't it? And and just, I know lots of people who have really struggled with that part of losing someone. One thing I really like about that, the opening line, it only took me 15 years. Like, it's kind of, it's like a bit of a joke to it, isn't it? I was thinking, was that like your dad's sense of humor? Was that kind of like, that's the way it came out, or was that kind of the kind of thing your dad would find funny?
I think he probably would. Yeah, I think it's also, it alludes to my laziness, probably, and my inability to get my arse in gear. But I think there were so many reasons why it took me 15 years, but being scared, I think, as well, being fearful of what I might find, and scared of how it would make me feel, scared of it bringing up emotions that I didn't want it to bring up. And I think becoming a dad myself and having a family of my own, I felt like I had more strength going up there to do that job of clearing it out. And my mum came with me as well, which was a real help. And and so I wasn't facing it on my own. She was there, and even though, you know, she and my dad had divorced when I was 4 or 5 years old, so he was no longer a part of her life, but just having her there for that clear out was a big help. And yeah, it's like you say, it's a thing that a lot of us struggle with, and I think that's a reason why I wanted to talk about it as well, because it's not something we find in songs very often, you know, talking about clearing out somebody's house, but it is a really heavy moment in anybody's life, whoever that person is. Putting their clothes in a bag and all that procedure, it feels very real in that moment.
Yeah, definitely. What's it feel like now the album's finished?
It feels good. It feels you know, by the time this goes out, maybe the album will be out, or it'll be almost coming out. So it feels like the things I've wanted to say for a long time. I think as a songwriter, we often think like, what do we want to say? What do we want to be remembered for saying? And I think for me, going through grief at a young age and having that childhood with a sick dad who was you know, bedridden for a long time, paralyzed for a long time, experiences that perhaps a lot of people might not have been through, but something that a lot of people will resonate with. And I just wanted to articulate it for that community, really, so that they perhaps feel heard, feel seen, that grief at a young age is slightly different. Losing a parent younger than you should is slightly different. And so, yeah, these are things that I've wanted to talk about for a long time. But like we said at the very beginning, maybe I wasn't ready to, or I didn't have the emotional capacity to write these songs back then. But having them out now feels really good. And I feel like now I can go and write something completely different, and knowing that body of work is out there feels really good.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, well done, Al. I think it's a great thing to have done, and yeah, hopefully it does reach a lot of people who have had similar experiences, or we'll get a lot out of it. Yeah, and so the album's out. I think this is going to come out on the week of the album.
Right.
So people listening to this, I think the album will be out in a few days. Is it 4th of January it comes out, is it?
12th of January, yeah.
12th of January. Yeah, and you can get it everywhere. I'll put obviously links to all Al's website and social media and everything in the description to the episode. What I'm going to do here is something we've never done before on the podcast. Normally we have the song for this section at the start of this section before we talk about it, but it kind of felt nice to just kind of talk about it there. So we're going to end with the song, end the episode with the song. But yeah, thank you very much, Al. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thanks, Ben. And yeah, it's been really good to talk to you. And I think what you do with Swan Song is really important as well. And I think just, you know, bringing this conversation into the public's sphere is really important. And I think it having been someone who's been scared to talk about death and dying for a long time, I think, you know, by having projects like yourselves and doing this podcast, it just helps make it all a bit less scary, which I think is really, really, really important.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you very much, Al. Yeah, every little bit helps, and everyone who shares their story or shares their experience can hopefully help others to do the same. But yeah, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. And thanks for tuning in, everyone. I'll be back on the episode soon. And yeah, we're going to finish with 15 Years, the title track from Al Lewis's new album.
Finally cleared your house up. It only took me 15 years. I was stuck in the attic. I couldn't move from all the spider webs. And entangled in my head. And all the papers that you'd kept about that railway you were gonna build someday before you got sick. It hurts to be in your house again, looking through old photographs, so many that made me laugh. I hear the goldfish on the surface of the pond you built outside your windowsill. I finally cleared your house out. It only took me 15 years, but our apple tree's still standing. 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 And it makes me feel like crying. It makes me feel like crying. It makes me feel like crying. Crying. It makes me feel like crying. It makes me feel like. It makes me feel like crying. It makes me feel like. It makes me feel like crying. It makes me feel like. It makes me feel like crying. It makes me feel like. It makes me feel like crying. I finally cleared your house out. It only took me 15